You have a sense that has been forcibly turned off, not the kind of sixth sense that belongs to ghost stories, but a biological ability that once allowed humans to decode the hidden language of the earth. Right now, trees around you are not silent. They are transmitting signals, exchanging warnings, and carrying ancient memory through vibrations you have been trained to ignore. The separation is not natural. It has been imposed, cutting you off from a dialogue that once defined the bond between humans and the living world. This forgotten sense is not superstition. Science has already begun to reveal that forests function as a vast web of communication. Trees share nutrients through fungal networks, send alerts when pests attack, and adjust their chemistry to defend themselves. Yet what modern research records as signals are the same vibrations ancient traditions described as the voice of nature. The difference is that today most people cannot hear it, because the channel has been muted. Only 1% of humanity still retains this capacity, and that number immediately creates urgency. If something so rare remains hidden in plain sight, the desire to reclaim it grows stronger. Scarcity makes it precious, and the thought that you could belong to that 1% transforms curiosity into determination. This is not about mystical initiation. It is about recovering a faculty that your biology already holds, a technology coded into your DNA, silenced but never destroyed. The words "secret language of the earth" strike a chord, because language is the foundation of human meaning. When you are told that the earth has a language and that you once spoke it, you feel both the loss of something essential and the possibility of rediscovering it. Trees become more than wood and leaves. They become transmitters, antennae standing at the threshold between earth and sky. Their roots mirror their branches, forming the same geometry the ancients encoded into symbols and myths. By presenting trees as living blueprints, the narrative gives physical form to the abstract idea of reconnection. Framing this ability as a sense that has been switched off creates a subtle accusation against modern life. It suggests that society, education, and technology have dulled perception. The audience is cast as both victim and potential hero, deprived of a natural gift, but able to reclaim it through awareness and practice. This tension between suppression and awakening is a psychological driver that sustains attention. The reassurance that this is not fantasy but biological energy dormant within you prevents skepticism from shutting the door. The listener may resist mystical claims, but biology is harder to dismiss. By calling it a latent technology, the narration bridges ancient spirituality and contemporary science. It allows a modern audience to believe that reactivating this sense is not blind faith, but applied biology. The structure of this passage is deliberate. It begins with disruption, challenging the belief that only 5 senses exist. It then offers reframing. This sixth sense is scientific, not paranormal. Next, it provides imagery, trees communicating, vibrations carrying messages. Then it adds exclusivity. Only 1% can still perceive it. Finally, it resolves with empowerment. This sense lives in you and can be awakened. Each step increases the audience's emotional investment, pulling them deeper into the story. For spoken delivery, pacing is key. The opening line must be delivered with quiet intensity, like revealing a secret. Descriptions of trees and vibrations should slow down, giving space for imagery to sink in. The statement about 1% should be stronger, marked with a rise in energy, to emphasize scarcity and urgency. The final reassurance about dormant biological energy should soften again, ending with calm authority to reassure the listener that this journey is safe and possible. This passage works because it combines emotional resonance with scientific plausibility. It gives the listener both the thrill of uncovering a hidden mystery and the comfort of believing it is real and accessible. It suggests not only that the forest is alive with conversation, but that you were born with the ability to hear it. The implication is clear. You are incomplete without this sense, and reawakening it will restore a deeper form of belonging. The idea that a forgotten sense lies dormant within you becomes even more convincing when you look at the evidence nature itself provides. What ancient mystics once described as the language of the earth is today being mapped in laboratories and forests across the globe. Researchers have uncovered a complex underground network formed by fungal filaments, scientifically known as mycorrhizae, that link the roots of trees into a living internet. Through this network, forests exchange carbon, nitrogen, and water. The picture that emerges is not of individual trees competing for resources, but of an integrated organism, a community bound by constant communication. This discovery redefines the concept of a miracle. What tradition once called sacred wisdom is now appearing in scientific journals as verifiable data. The role of mother trees within this network illustrates the depth of cooperation. These massive ancient giants act as central hubs, sending life-sustaining carbon to seedlings struggling in the shadows. Without this invisible transfer, many young trees would not survive their first years. It is a clear demonstration of care, protection, and interdependence written into biology itself. Ancient cultures spoke of forest spirits or guardians watching over younger life, and modern ecology now provides the mechanism. The metaphor is no longer poetic, it is physiological. The communication does not stop with nutrition. When a tree is attacked by pests or disease, it broadcasts chemical distress signals through this underground web. Neighboring trees receive the warning and immediately adjust their chemistry, producing compounds that make their leaves less appealing to invaders. In essence, the forest mounts a coordinated defense before the threat arrives at every trunk. This cooperative intelligence is not random. It shows a system that has evolved to act as one body. Ancient mythologies that portrayed the forest as a singular consciousness now appear less like fantasy and more like accurate description. Even more astonishing is the discovery that plants emit sounds. Experiments have recorded ultrasonic clicks produced when trees and smaller plants are under stress, whether from drought, physical damage, or nutrient scarcity. These sounds occur at frequencies too high for the human ear, but they are measurable and consistent. For centuries, shamans and mystics claimed they could hear the trees. Today, sensitive microphones confirm that a form of acoustic language has always been present, hidden just beyond our ordinary perception. Once again, what was dismissed as folklore becomes data. This convergence between science and ancient wisdom reframes the entire question of human perception. If trees truly communicate through vibration, chemistry, and sound, then the suggestion that humans once possessed a biological sense tuned to those frequencies is no longer implausible. It becomes logical. Our ancestors lived embedded in nature, dependent on its cycles for survival. It would be natural for them to have heightened awareness of signals modern society ignores. The conditioning that silenced this capacity may simply be the result of centuries of urbanization, artificial noise, and disconnection from the living ground beneath our feet. By redefining miracle as data, the narrative draws a direct bridge between mysticism and measurable reality. The wood wide web, mother trees, ultrasonic signals, these are not metaphors. They are mechanisms, yet their existence breathes life into the symbolic traditions of old. Ancient texts that spoke of universal connection, of wisdom encoded in natural forms, can now be interpreted as intuitive recognition of what science has only recently begun to measure. The sacred and the scientific are not in opposition. They are two languages describing the same truth. This is why the hook about a dormant sense gains credibility in the modern listener's mind. When you hear that trees talk, the idea resonates because you have seen scientific headlines confirming it. When you are told that forests behave like superorganisms, you recall documentaries and research validating the claim. The line between myth and fact blurs, not because myth was false, but because science is finally catching up. The new miracle is that what once seemed mystical now arrives as peer-reviewed evidence. For the listener, this section is a turning point. The narrative shifts from the dramatic claim of a hidden sixth sense to the proof that nature itself is alive with constant communication. The forest is no longer a backdrop or resource. It is an intelligent network, a pulsing organism, and every tree is a node in its system. To understand this is to realize that ancient initiates were not indulging in fantasy when they spoke of the Earth's voice. They were describing a biological reality we are only now learning to perceive again. And so the invitation becomes irresistible. If trees are speaking, if signals are flowing beneath your feet, if ultrasonic cries are sounding in the air beyond your ears, then the suggestion that you can learn to tune in no longer feels mystical. It feels like reclaiming a sense evolution gave you. The convergence of science and ancient wisdom proves that this communication system has always been there. What changes now is your readiness to step into it, to reawaken the dormant sense, and to begin decoding the language of the planet itself. The branching form of a tree is not mere decoration. It is a repeating algorithm folded into wood and leaf, root and crown. That same recursive logic appears in river deltas, lightning forks, bronchial trees, and spiral galaxies. Ancient teachers encoded that pattern as a symbol because it compresses an operational truth. Similar forms resonate with similar dynamics. When Thoth and later Hermes Trismegistus spoke of as above, so below, they were signaling that structural correspondence matters. Correspondence is a doorway to resonance. If two systems share the same organizing pattern, they can more easily lock into each other's rhythm. That is the practical meaning behind the metaphor. Symbols in the old texts function like schematics, rather than metaphors. A glyph is a compressed map of relationships. It tells you which variables to align: rhythm, proportion, polarity, and timing. The emerald tablet's terse lines act as protocol instructions for synchronizing one field with another. Read as instruction. The tablet points toward a procedure of alignment. The repeated branching motif is a tuning template. To apply it is to arrange your attention, breath, and intention, so that your internal oscillations mirror the forest's external oscillations. In other words, the symbol prescribes an entrainment. Entrainment is a physical phenomenon. Two pendulums on the same beam will gradually swing together. Metronomes on a shared platform will converge to a common tempo. Biological systems do the same. Heartbeats, respiratory cycles, and neural rhythms can phase lock to external stimuli when those stimuli share frequency or pattern. The ancients did not have the vocabulary of phase, frequency, and coherence. They had evocative imagery and ritual. Thoth's diagrams and the emblems carried in Hermetic texts encode a protocol for producing entrainment across scales, from cell to organism to ecosystem. The branching pattern matters because it defines multiple nested timescales and energy pathways. A branch network divides energy and information while preserving a coherent geometry. When you mirror that geometry internally, through posture, breath, and directed attention, you are not literally cloning a tree. You are establishing a structural homology that makes phase locking more natural. The symbol acts as a cognitive scaffold. It orients your imagination to instantiate the same relations that organize the forest. Imagination here functions like a tuning fork. When struck, it sets nearby resonant forms into sympathetic vibration. Ritual is the practical toolset. The old rites that place your hands on wood, slow your breath, and recite a pattern are not theatrical. They are timed interventions to change the spectral composition of your physiology. Slow, even breathing lowers your respiratory frequency into a band that couples readily with the slower rhythms of large trees and soil processes. Gentle pressure and sustained contact increase somatosensory gain at the skin and fascia, enhancing sensitivity to micro-vibrations traveling through bark and wood. Focused imagery shifts neural gain to interoceptive channels. Combined, these actions lower noise and raise the signal-to-noise ratio for subtle environmental input. Thoth's symbol confers an instruction set for which aspects of physiology to adjust. It asks you to widen the temporal window of attention, to favor low-frequency coherence over high-frequency chatter. Practically, that means slowing down the breath, lengthening exhalation, softening the jaw, softening cortical chatter, and letting the autonomic nervous system move toward a calm, receptive state. Polyvagal science describes how a safe social or calm physiological posture permits more nuanced perception. In older terms, the symbol calls you into safety. In modern terms, it modulates vagal tone and heart-brain coupling. Both descriptions point to the same lever. Change internal rhythm to receive external rhythm. The symbol also encodes directionality. As above, so below invites bidirectional tuning. You align downwards, rooting, grounding, and upwards, expanding, opening. Grounding increases mechanical coupling to soil and fungal networks. Opening the chest and lifting the gaze expands resonant cavities and shifts cranial pressures that subtly alter inner ear and vestibular feedback. These micro-adjustments change how your sensory organs register low-amplitude environmental cues. The ancient ritual combines both vectors so your whole organism becomes a tuned antenna. Finally, the symbol normalizes practice. Like any protocol, repetition improves fidelity. The first session is noisy and confusing. After repeated cycles, you train your nervous system to adopt a predictable set point during approach to the forest. That set point is the modern correlate of initiation. It is a trained physiological and attentional mode. Once established, it increases the probability that weak signals, ultrasonic plant clicks, chemical gradients, subtle electromagnetic patterns, rise above perceptual threshold. Reading Thoth as engineer rather than mystic reframes the practice. The glyphs become tuning diagrams. The rituals become phase control algorithms. The myths become mnemonic devices for embodied procedures that modulate rhythm, geometry, and attention. This translation does not debunk the sacred. It makes sacred practice operational. It hands you the tools to test, refine, and repeat. The ancient code was never mere poetry. It was a procedural guide to aligning human rhythm with the larger, living systems we inhabit. The aftermath of synchronization is not temporary spectacle. It carries into daily life, restructuring how decisions are made, how problems are approached, and how loneliness is perceived. Once you have experienced resonance with a tree, the memory of that alignment becomes an internal reference. It establishes a new baseline for clarity. Choices that once seemed clouded begin to resolve more quickly. Not because external circumstances change, but because you recognize intuitive signals faster. The sense of already knowing that arises in the forest does not vanish when you return home. It becomes a repeatable mode of awareness. Problem-solving begins to shift. Instead of grinding through endless analysis, you allow space for answers to emerge from a quieter, deeper part of consciousness. This is not magical thinking. It is a practical adjustment in cognitive style. By stepping into resonance, you have trained your mind to integrate multiple streams of input, rational, emotional, sensory, without being overwhelmed. Solutions arise with a clarity that feels immediate, because the usual noise of overthinking has been filtered out. People who practice this connection often describe sudden insights appearing in daily tasks, flashes of understanding that cut through confusion. The forest becomes an enduring mentor, even when you are far from its trees. The perception of loneliness changes even more dramatically. Modern life isolates individuals in urban environments, reducing contact with non-human forms of intelligence. That isolation is one of the deepest wounds of contemporary society. But once you have experienced true communication with the living world, the premise of being alone collapses. You realize that you exist within a network that includes not only people, but also plants, animals, waters, and stones. The forest handshake, the synchronization, the mirrored intuition. These remind you that you are never disconnected, only unaware. After this realization, moments of solitude no longer equal abandonment. They become opportunities to tune in again. Small signs in daily life take on new significance. A bird crossing your path at a specific moment, a sudden breeze during reflection, or the repetition of a particular symbol, all become part of the extended conversation. Skeptics call this projection, but once you understand resonance, you know that meaning itself is the language of vibration. The external world reflects your internal state, and when the internal is aligned, external synchronicities multiply. What once seemed like coincidence now appears as dialogue. This does not mean surrendering rationality. It means adding a new layer of perception that coexists with rational analysis. Respect remains essential. The relationship is not extractive. You are not mining the forest for answers. You are participating in an exchange. Attention is your offering. Wisdom is the return. Without respect, the resonance collapses into projection and fantasy. With respect, the connection matures into partnership. Ancient traditions always emphasized reciprocity, offering songs, acts of gratitude, because they understood that any one-sided relationship decays. Modern practice may not involve ritual sacrifice, but it must involve genuine humility and care. This ensures the channel stays open and trustworthy. Consistency deepens the effect. A single encounter can be transformative, but repetition establishes resilience. The nervous system learns through practice. Each session of synchronization strengthens neural pathways, making it easier to enter coherence the next time. Over weeks and months, the shift becomes less a temporary state and more a permanent trait. This is the difference between a fleeting mystical experience and sustained awakening. The goal is not a moment of wonder, but a durable capacity for alignment. The forest also becomes a mirror of personal growth. As you change, the quality of the communication changes. At first, the mirror may show only surface emotions: stress, sadness, fleeting joy. Later, it reveals deeper patterns: stubborn habits, unresolved fears, hidden strengths. Over time, it begins to reflect the integration of shadow and light, the way you have transformed wounds into wisdom. In this sense, the relationship is not static but evolutionary. The tree teaches by mirroring your progress back to you. The practical applications are vast. Leaders use this practice to make clearer decisions under pressure. Artists use it to access creativity beyond rational limits. People suffering from anxiety or disconnection use it to restore a sense of belonging. Farmers and ecologists use it to guide land stewardship, listening to subtle cues about soil and weather. The core principle remains the same: resonance plus intention yields clarity and connection. Whether in personal healing or professional problem solving, the method adapts. Ultimately, the consequence of this relationship is not escape from reality, but deeper immersion in it. The world does not become a dream. It becomes more vivid, more meaningful, more interactive. Every tree, every breath of wind, every flicker of light is recognized as part of a shared field of intelligence. That recognition stabilizes into a lasting form of awareness. You are not reaching for a mystical realm beyond the world. You are re-inhabiting the one you already live in. The awakening is sustainable because it is anchored in biology. Breathing, attention, visualization, resonance. These are repeatable, measurable processes. They do not depend on belief but on practice. And practice converts temporary inspiration into permanent transformation. This is why the ancients encoded their wisdom in symbols and rituals, not to mystify, but to ensure continuity. The forest handshake was only the start. The synchronization was the key. The long-term practice is the door kept open. Through respect, repetition, and humility, the connection ceases to be occasional and becomes enduring. With one hand resting against the bark and the other placed gently over your chest, the practice shifts into its most crucial stage. You are no longer only entering the forest as a respectful guest. You are now attempting synchronization, the deliberate alignment of your inner rhythm with the slower, deeper rhythm of the tree. The first step is awareness of your own pulse. Feeling your heartbeat beneath your palm is an act of grounding. It reminds you that you too are a rhythmic being, sustained by cycles and oscillations. Your pulse is not random. It is the most fundamental rhythm of your existence. Next comes visualization, but this is not fantasy. It is functional imagination. You begin to picture the flow of sap rising from roots to crown, moving with a tempo slower and more enduring than your own heartbeat. This imagined pulse becomes a model for your nervous system to mirror. Neuroscience has shown that mental imagery activates many of the same pathways as direct sensory experience. In this case, imagining the tree's circulation recruits your body to tune itself toward that slower rhythm. Visualization becomes a bridge between what you feel internally and what you perceive externally. The breath anchors the process. Inhaling as though you are drawing energy upward from the tree, exhaling as though you are sending your own energy downward into its roots, establishes a reciprocal circuit. Each breath becomes a loop of exchange. Biologically, this slow and conscious breathing lengthens heart rate variability, the measure of your body's adaptability and coherence. Psychologically, it generates a felt sense of connection. Symbolically, it enacts the principle of reciprocity. You are not simply receiving, but also contributing. The loop affirms partnership rather than consumption. As the cycles repeat, you may notice that your heart rate begins to soften and lengthen. This is not imagination. It is entrainment. Just as pendulums eventually synchronize when sharing a beam, your physiology is capable of phase locking with external rhythms. By deliberately aligning with the imagined heartbeat of the tree, you guide your body toward coherence, with the ecosystem's slower frequencies. This state is not about control. It is about surrender to resonance. You are giving permission for your own rhythm to be carried by something larger. Now, the second element of the technique becomes essential: focused imagination with intent. The temptation is to ask questions in words. What should I do? How should I heal? Where should I go? But language is a construct of the logical mind, not the vibrational field. Instead, you generate feelings as though the answer is already alive in you. If you are seeking clarity, you create the feeling of certainty, the calm confidence that arrives when the path is already known. If you are seeking healing, you cultivate the sensation of vitality, the warmth and energy of a body that has recovered. The projection is emotional, not verbal. Feelings are the universal signals of vibration, comprehensible across species and even across systems. This process of feeling the answer before it arrives is not arbitrary. Neuroscience shows that the brain responds to imagined states as though they are partially real, activating associated circuits and hormonal cascades. When you imagine peace, your parasympathetic system releases calming chemicals. When you imagine vitality, your endocrine system increases energy output. By holding these states in synchrony with the tree's rhythm, you magnify them, feeding them into a resonance chamber larger than your individual body. The tree becomes both amplifier and stabilizer, lending its ancient frequency to steady the fragile signals you project. The result is often a sudden shift in perception. It is not a whisper of words but a surge of knowing, an intuition that feels less like discovery and more like memory. This is because the process bypasses linguistic analysis and taps directly into embodied cognition. Insights arrive whole, without needing to be assembled step by step. Many describe it as a download, a complete packet of clarity received in a single moment. The mind may later translate it into words, but the initial experience is pure certainty. The more consistently you practice, the stronger this channel becomes. What begins as subtle sensations, the faint echo of heartbeat, the whisper of imagined sap, solidifies into a reliable practice of communication. Over time, the line between inner and outer dissolves. You no longer distinguish between your own intuition and the wisdom of the forest, because both operate within the same frequency field. The synchronization removes the illusion of separation. This technique represents the core of the Thoth teaching: resonance plus intention. By aligning your biology with the rhythm of the tree and projecting focused feelings, you activate the forgotten sense described earlier. It is not mystical. It is mechanical, though expressed in symbolic language. It trains your nervous system to perceive in ways modern culture has neglected. And once activated, it becomes transferable. The state you cultivate with the tree extends to other interactions, with water, with sky, even with human relationships. The handshake of the previous step opened the door. This synchronization step invites you inside. It is the point where participation replaces observation. Through breath, pulse, and focused feeling, you become part of the conversation. And in that moment, the forest stops being scenery and becomes collaborator. It reflects your intention, stabilizes your vibration, and returns to you the clarity that you already carried but had forgotten how to access. At the edge of the forest, you pause, and this pause is not trivial. It is the transition point where the noise of daily life begins to fade, and the rhythm of the ecosystem can be allowed back into perception. Taking 3 slow breaths is the first reset. Each inhale draws awareness inward. Each exhale releases the backlog of tasks, obligations, and artificial pressures that otherwise dominate attention. This simple respiratory act recalibrates the nervous system, shifting it away from a state of haste and into one of receptivity. Modern physiology confirms that such deliberate breathing alters vagal tone, lowers heart rate, and primes sensory pathways for subtle signals. What appears as ritual is in fact a biological gateway. When you whisper, "I come to listen, not to take," you set an intention that matters. Intention is not just psychological suggestion. Cognitive science shows that framing an experience in advance modifies what stimuli are prioritized. Declaring yourself as a listener changes the weighting of perception from aggressive extraction to open reception. Forest traditions have long required this humility, because ecosystems respond differently depending on approach. In ecological terms, an intruder behaves differently than a participant, By shifting your role, you establish the ethical and energetic conditions for dialogue. Stepping slowly into the forest is more than courtesy. It is an act of entrainment. Moving without haste allows your gait, your breathing, and your attention to settle into lower frequencies that match the forest's baseline rhythms. Rapid, forceful entry floods the senses with noise. Slow progression filters that noise. You are not looking for spectacle. You are allowing subtle cues to rise. This orientation is what the ancients encoded in their approach rituals. The forest will not be compelled, but it will invite if you arrive correctly. The tree you are guided to may not be the tallest or the most visually striking. The selection is not aesthetic but resonant. By allowing intuition to direct you, you bypass analytical filters and give unconscious perception priority. Research into implicit decision-making shows that humans often register environmental cues below conscious awareness. Trusting intuition is therefore not mystical but practical. It allows weak signals to shape choice. You feel a pull toward a particular trunk, not because of superstition, but because subtle environmental features, smell, light, sound, even electromagnetic variation, are already interacting with your body. Calling this guidance is simply another way of acknowledging those interactions. Contact is the handshake. Placing your palm on the bark and closing your eyes collapses the distance between observer and environment. Texture, temperature, and vibration now replace sight as the primary data. This sensory redirection is critical. Vision dominates human cognition, often drowning out subtler inputs. By closing the eyes, you elevate touch and proprioception, the channels most likely to register micro-variations in the living surface beneath your hand. Bark is not static. It transmits micro-tremors from sap movement, wind stress, and insect activity. Your skin and fascia are sensitive enough to detect changes at this scale when attention is sharpened. The instruction to focus only on the sensation is a neurological hack. Concentrated awareness increases cortical representation of the stimulus. Neuroscience shows that attention can expand the effective sensitivity of sensory neurons. By focusing on texture, rough or smooth, cool or warm, you amplify the fidelity of what you can perceive. What begins as simple bark gradually reveals layers, slight moisture, faint pulsing, or subtle vibration. These are not supernatural. They are real physical phenomena usually ignored. The ritual sharpens perception to capture them. What happens next is subtle, and subtlety is the point. The first communication does not arrive as words but as shifts in internal state, an unprovoked emotion. A sudden calm, a brief sadness, or even a flicker of imagery appears. These are not imposed by imagination, but evoked by the altered state of sensory focus and environmental entrainment. Studies on embodied cognition show that bodily posture and tactile contact can trigger unexpected memory recall and emotional release. The ancients described this as the forest responding. Science would describe it as cross-modal integration of internal and external signals. Both explanations point to the same reality. A channel has been opened. This is why the handshake metaphor is apt. A handshake does not convey information in words. It conveys presence, intention, and willingness. Likewise, the tree's first response is not an answer, but an acknowledgement. It is confirmation that the boundary between your nervous system and the ecosystem has been thinned. You are no longer only an observer, but a participant. The ritual has moved you from abstract knowledge of the wood wide web into embodied connection with it. The simplicity of this step hides its depth. Many will dismiss it because it lacks spectacle. But complexity is not required for profound effect. A handshake is simple. A bow is simple, yet each can transform the context of an interaction. By touching the tree with attention, you have entered the conversation. What happens beyond this point will depend on consistency, patience, and respect. The ancients emphasized repetition not for tradition's sake, but because repeated practice trains the body to access this state faster and more reliably. The first handshake is, therefore, not an endpoint but an initiation. It establishes the link that allows deeper synchronization in later steps. Without this respectful entry, resonance cannot occur. The forest does not respond to force, but it does respond to humility and presence. This first practice, pause, breathe, declare, slow, approach, touch, focus, is the minimal viable ritual for opening communication. It is the threshold where biological fact and ancient symbol overlap, where the old language of trees becomes tangible again, not in myth, but in lived experience.